Hi, I'm Ron and welcome to Popsicle, where I talk about popular culture, science, and everything in between. In case you're new to this channel, I'm Ron. I'm a biology teacher and researcher, but I'm also immersed in popular culture. And that's essentially what my YouTube channel is all about. Popsicle is about combining my interests in science and popular culture, and hopefully, in effect, making science more interesting for everyone. Now, in this episode of Popsicle, I would like to address a question that is often asked about science fiction and science fiction authors, something that has probably gone through your mind if you've ever read at least one science fiction text in your life, and that is, does science fiction predict the future? Now, we've all seen it. We're all familiar with examples, like, for example, Star Trek, showing us very, very early stages, predictive future, prediction of the future of having these telecommunications gadgets that we are enjoying now, and also 3D printing, if you think about it. The fact that Star Trek vessels have the ability to print out food. This is something that we can do to a certain extent, even when it comes to organs. We can say somewhat that William Gibson's Neuromancer predicted a lot of the features of the internet that we are using now, and also certain biotechnological innovations like cybernetics. And then, of course, you have George Orwell's 1984 predicting a future, which we are living in now, where everything that we are doing is essentially being seen by potentially everyone through technology like CCTVs. So these and other works might really make us think, and it's excusable for us to think, that science fiction is really meant to be predictive of the future. But the question is it? It really depends on who you talk to. There are certain people who would say that it's not. And one of those people is the brilliant science fiction author Ursula Le Guin, author of The Left Hand of Darkness and, of course, The Earth-Sea Cycle of novels. The Dispossessed is another one of her classic science fiction works. And in the preface to her classic Left Hand of Darkness, in which she tackles the world of the Gethenians, an androgynous species descended from humans, she says, and I quote, "Science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive," unquote. She starts her preface by talking about what I just said, which is that a lot of people tend to think that science fiction predicts the future. But she argues that that is not the job of science fiction authors. It is not the job of novelists. It's the job of soothsayers, seers, and futurologists who are actually paid to predict the future somewhat. It's not a novelist's job to do that. Instead, what a novelist's job is to describe, not to extrapolate, but to describe what is currently happening. And I would agree. I think a science fiction author, despite using tropes and a lot of other features that would be indicative of a future or seem to extrapolate into a future that we haven't seen yet, are speaking more about their present than they are about a potential future. Certainly, it is not a science fiction author's obligation to society to predict the future. Okay? We can't rely on them to do that. They have no magical powers, supernatural abilities, or scientifically derived powers to be able to predict what will happen in the future. When we say that science fiction authors are speaking as much about the present as they are about the future, even more about the present, they are living in a particular context, and it is this context that really shapes their view of the world. For example, George Orwell wrote 1984 right after the Second World War, and so that totalitarian aspect that you have running through 1984 was undoubtedly influenced by the wars and social ills that transpired during the Second World War. And a lot of science fiction that we see about the scares of genetics and the scares in society about each suspicions of one another came from the Cold War era. So the present really shapes the context that science fiction authors live in. And that's really what they speak about, not so much the future. It's their interpretation of the present, and it could be very, very creative. In fact, Ursula Le Guin says that a novelist's job is to lie about the present. And by that, she means really the novelist interprets the present to his or her benefit, how or how it fits his or her tastes, and it's really up to the reader to believe the novelist or not. We've seen an extreme example of people believing or taking a science fiction author's words as fact, and that is something that we see in Scientology, where L. Ron Hubbard's words are actually treated as sort of, dogmatic by Scientologists. Now, maybe one good example of how science fiction actually speaks about the present and not really uh, necessarily about the future is Black Mirror. Black Mirror is really disturbing to a lot of people, and that's in big part probably because a lot of the things that they are talking about in that series are already happening to a certain extent. A good example of an episode in Black Mirror that does this is Nosedive, in which the social media performance of people really determines their status in life for real. And this is something that we're beginning to see in several places in the world. Yes, it's scary to be judged according to, well, everything that you do that's seen by everyone and exacerbated by social media, the toxicity of Twitter culture and all of that is touched on by this particular episode also. So it's again a view and perspective on the present as much as it is casting into the future possibly. But again, that is not the responsibility of the science fiction novelist. Although some science fiction novelists, I'm pretty sure, have set out to personally do that because they want to, but it's not their obligation. When we think about a film like Contagion, which was released many years ago, and we think about the current situation that we are in, it's very tempting to think of Contagion as having predicted the current scenario that we are experiencing. But of course, that wasn't really the intention of Contagion. It was more of a mirror of what was happening at that time, which was already seeing an increase in the interface between humans and wildlife and environmental degradation and the spread of diseases. That's not something new. That's something that we've been seeing ever since then and even before that. It just seems scarily prescient in that it seemed to predict this breakdown that we are seeing, this large scale effect of a pandemic that we have not seen as a modern society. And that's I think that's what partly what lends science fiction its power. Now, having said all of that, we cannot discount the fact that science fiction has contributed to the future technology that we see. It has inspired technologists, engineers. For example, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash has influenced people in Google with their technological innovations. So science fiction does have that effect on society, particularly biotechnology. It's been written before that biotechnology is probably the best example of a field in biology that really excites people and inspires people. And we need only look at Jurassic Park as an example. When Jurassic Park, the book and the movie, came out, it inspired a whole batch of young people to take up genetics as a career, particularly genetic engineering. And so I believe we can rightly say that we owe a lot of uh, what we have in terms of the interest, at least, in biotechnology and genetic engineering and CRISPR, a modern technology, from the interest that such science fiction texts as Jurassic Park inspired in a lot of people. So yes, it does have that effect, but science fiction authors as novelists don't have the obligation to predict the future for us. So if their quote unquote predictions, or better yet, their vision as depicted in their science fiction texts doesn't pan out, we can't go around blaming them for that future and for getting it wrong, because that wasn't their obligation to begin with. I'd love to hear your opinions on this. Not everyone necessarily agrees with the view of Ursula Le Guin. For example, Gene Wolfe, a brilliant science fiction author and one of the most revered science fiction authors of all time, I think has a stronger inclination to believe in science fiction being predictive. So you might have your own opinions on this, please share them below. I'd love to talk about it. If you enjoyed that discussion and you would like to see more, or if you would like to see more about science and other aspects of popular culture, don't forget to subscribe to Popsicle so that you may be alerted to new content in the future. See you again next time.